So, hello listeners. Today I'm going to read The Good Luck Lamb. This is a lovely story. I used to read this to Auntie Mel many times. It's about wool. The Good Luck Lamb by Lisa Campbell Ernst. I'm just going to turn off a light. It might be easier for you to see the pictures. Natalie Parsons loved helping her grandfather tend their small flock of sheep. "Take care," he would caution when Natalie drove the sheep to pasture by herself. "Selling their wool is our only way to make money, and times are hard." "We'll be just fine," Natalie would reply. "Don't you worry." Natalie always carried a bag along to collect bits of wool because the one thing she loved even more than tending the sheep was weaving on her grandfather's loom. Mr. Parsons had been a weaver, but now his hands were old and stiff. "I'll leave the weaving to you," he told Natalie. "You sure do have a talent." At shearing time there was never enough wool to save the fleece for Natalie's weaving. For now the scraps she picked up would have to do. "Someday I'll weave something really pretty," Natalie said wistfully. See, they're shearing the sheep there. I think she likes this lamb. One day in early spring, when Natalie was out with the flock, she heard a strange bleating noise. In some bushes nearby she found a very odd-looking newborn lamb. "Poor thing," Natalie said, scooping him up in her apron. Where is your flock?" His coat didn't look at all like the other baby lamb's. Soft, fine wool, it was dry and wiry. Soon Natalie had the baby lamb settled cosily in the warm barn. "Oh, please let me keep him," she said to her grandfather. Mr. Parsons shook his head. "But his wool's no good, honey." "Maybe that's why he was left in the meadow." "Please," Natalie begged. "I can tell he's special. He's a good luck lamb." Her grandfather reluctantly agreed. "I'll call you Clover," Natalie said to the little lamb. "Like a lucky four-leaf clover." It's a nice story. Look, he's getting bigger there. He's still got wiry old wool. And what he's eating. As Clover grew bigger, his wool grew long and wild. Natalie loved him just the way he was, but sometimes the other lambs made fun of him. Clover worried about being so different, and whenever Clover worried, he got hungry. Running off across the meadow, he would find a shady spot and nibble on fresh, tender leaves. As time went on, Clover grew round and chubby. The seasons passed, and Clover lived happily on the little farm with Natalie and her grandfather. When spring arrived, the other lamb fleeces were shorn. "Your wool may not be very good for selling," Natalie told Clover, "but we should trim it, otherwise you'll be hot this summer." As Clover waited his turn to be shorn, he got so nervous that he ran away to find something to eat, and each time Natalie suggested trimming his coat, Clover disappeared. His coat grew longer and longer. One Saturday, Natalie and her grandfather rode to town to buy seeds at the general store. The store owner was always rude to poor people. "What do you want?" she asked Natalie. Natalie handed her a list. 2 bags of carrot seeds. "Wait right here." The woman rushed off. Natalie gazed in wonder at the shelves filled with tempting things. Her eyes stopped near the counter. Displayed there was a pure white shawl, more beautifully woven than anything Natalie had imagined. She walked over and picked up the edge. It was woven in the herringbone pattern with fancy knots at each corner. "Don't touch that," the store owner shouted. Natalie dropped the shawl. I was admiring the weaving," she stammered. "I'm a weaver too." The woman laughed. "That shawl is made of the finest Tibetan lamb's wool and woven by real artists in France, Paris, France. It's very expensive. You may think you're a weaver, my dear, but you could never make something as fine as that." Over the summer, Natalie and Clover were so happy that they didn't notice how worried Mr. Parsons was. "This past year's been a hard one, honey," he said sadly. "There's not enough money to buy hay for the sheep to last the winter. We'll have to sell some of the lambs. We can only keep the ones who have their best wool." "You wouldn't sell Clover," Natalie cried. "He won't eat much. He can have my food." "I don't have any choice," her grandfather said. "It's our only way to keep the farm going." Poor Natalie, she doesn't want to lose Clover to a special lamb. "Tomorrow, Clover, we're going to cut your wool. I'll make a beautiful shawl out of it. I'm not sure how, but I'll figure out a way. It's our only chance to save you." Natalie lay down again, suddenly feeling hopeful. She began to plan every detail of the shawl she would weave. But now Clover couldn't sleep. All the talk of being sold or shorn had made him begin to worry. The more Clover worried, the hungrier he got. What is Clover up to? By dawn, Clover was starving and he slipped out to find something to eat. Suddenly, a few bites of something tasty would make him feel better. At the edge of the meadow, Clover spied an unusual shrub. It was covered from top to bottom with big, plump red berries, raspberries. Clover gingerly pulled one off and tasted it. "Bah," he sang, "delicious!" The sweet juice dribbled down Clover's chin. "Just a few more," he thought, "and I'll go straight home." But each time Clover decided to stop, he would see another perfect berry, too beautiful to pass by. At last he had eaten every one on the bush. Dear Clover. Uh-oh. At home, Natalie was waiting on the fence looking for him. "Bah!" Clover called. He looked for a smile on Natalie's face as she saw him, but her expression was very different. "Clover," she cried, "what has happened to your wool?" Clover looked to his left and then his right. He looked up and down. All Clover saw was red. Where is he? "Oh my goodness! You're the colour of raspberries," Natalie said. Clover shook off a leaf and Natalie began to understand. "Your coat was so dry it must have soaked the juice right up." She tried not to cry. "Don't worry, we'll just wash it until it's white again, and then we'll make our shawl." Clover felt very guilty, and he stood quite still as Natalie carefully cut off the wiry red wool. But no matter how many times she washed or boiled or rinsed it, the wool stayed the same colour. Finally she gave up. "It's no use," Natalie said, shaking her head. "I'll just have to use it the way it is." Natalie began the shawl as Clover watched. First she carded the wool to line up all the strands, then she spun it on her wheel. Natalie pulled and twisted sections evenly to make long pieces of yarn for weaving. The yarn from Clover's wool was fuzzy and full of lumps. Fibres stuck out in all directions, no matter how Natalie fussed with it. It's very red. When she began work on the loom, Natalie used her bits of white yarn to make a design. Row by row, Natalie fell into the rhythm of the weaving. She forgot about being tired. Very slowly the shawl grew larger. When Natalie and her grandfather rode into town that Saturday, Natalie held a package wrapped in paper. Clover and the other lambs that Mr. Parsons planned to sell rode in the back. The store owner frowned when they entered the general store. "I've come to sell you a shawl," Natalie said in a voice almost too quiet to be heard. The owner laughed. "Something you've made? I hardly think it will be suitable for my store." Natalie nervously unwrapped the package. Just as she held up the shawl, 2 customers came into the door. "My heavens!" gasped one of the customers. "What a beautiful shawl!" The other customer took it down from Natalie and wrapped it all around her shoulders. "It's the finest weaving I have ever seen. And the wool, what marvellous texture and colour." She turned to Natalie. "I must have it, dear, no matter how much it costs." Natalie smiled. I think that's the lady who's going to buy the shawl. The money from the shawl was enough to buy hay for the whole winter. As the cold winds howled outside and Clover's wool grew back to its usual length, Natalie planned her design for next year's shawl. "Maybe a dovetail weave," she mused, "with satin embroidery." "Bah," Clover answered softly as he dozed by the fire. That was up to Natalie, but he had plans of his own. Clover thought of the patch of wild blueberries that grew at the far end of the meadow. They had always looked tasty. I think next year Natalie might make a shawl that's blue. And that's the end of the story. Bye. See you next time I read a story. Love you.